You, Aria, and thanks for all your work on this bill. I want to thank the co-sponsors of the bill, the ACLU and the Innocence Project, who have been fantastic partners in helping us move this important reform forward. And really, SB 923 is fundamentally a pro-public safety bill. This is a bill to make sure that innocent people don't go to jail, and to make sure that the people who are actually committing crimes are the ones who face consequences. Because when an innocent person goes to jail, of course, it is a complete travesty of justice for that person, having just profound impacts that I can't even get my head around in terms of one's own life, your family, your community. But for the public, it means that the person who actually committed the crime is still out there. So anyone who says that they support public safety should be supporting the reforms contained in this bill to make sure we're doing everything in our power to have accurate eyewitness identifications. I think that the evidence is overwhelming that we know that in so many cases eyewitness identifications are maybe the only evidence or one of the, or perhaps the main piece of evidence of someone's guilt. And we also know that human beings, we are inherently limited in our ability to accurately ID people, especially if you saw the person briefly or when you're under enormous stress, which one would be when you're the victim of a crime. And we want to make sure we're doing everything in our power to account for the fact that human beings are not even close to perfect in identifying people. So I also, so the bill will adopt in California best practices, which a number of other states have already adopted in other parts of the country, but not in California. We like to pride ourselves on being very progressive in California, but in areas of criminal justice, we've not always been so progressive, and we need to really move forward here. The bill will require a few things, and these recommendations came from a task force in California from a decade or so ago, on which then Attorney General Jerry Brown served. So we're hoping the governor will take a positive view of the bill if we can get it to his desk. The bill will require just some basic reforms, blind administration of a lineup that a witness is looking at. Meaning that the person administering the lineup does not know who the suspect is and cannot, whether intentionally or unintentionally, signal to the witness, oh, this is the person that we think did it. We want to make sure that there is no persuasion, even if it's unintentional. Making sure that the witness is informed ahead of time that the suspect may or may not be part of the lineup. In other words, don't assume that you need to pick someone because the person must be in there. Letting people know that it might be none of these people. Making sure that so-called fillers, the people who are not suspects, look like, at least generally like, or fit the description of the suspect. In an extreme circumstance, you can imagine that if the suspect is African American, and you have one African American, and all the other fillers are not African American, that's probably the most extreme way of having really inappropriate fillers. But even in less extreme situations, you want to make sure, in terms of color of hair, build, and so forth, you're not really, again, focusing attention only on one of the people in the lineup. We also, at the end, requiring that the person be asked, okay, you've identified this person, what is your confidence level? So you've just 5 seconds ago identified this person. Are you very confident? Are you just somewhat confident? Are you not very confident? We know that once someone identifies someone psychologically, you will then start convincing yourself, and you will become more and more confident as the process goes on. But if you can, at that moment, ask the person, what is your confidence level? That is very, very valuable evidence and fair evidence to say, okay, this is weak evidence, this is strong evidence, and so forth. And then finally, also requiring that these sessions be video recorded. And we worked with law enforcement. They don't have to set up a Hollywood studio to do the video recording and spend a ton of money. It can be done on a very basic video recorder. And if it's impossible to do video for whatever reason, then audio would be the next best thing. So we tried to be flexible in the bill, and I think we have a strong bill that will make sure that justice is better served in California. I want to thank, first of all, Jennifer Thompson for being here today. And you may have hopefully seen her on TV or heard on the radio or read her book, which she co-authored with Ronald Cotton. And Jennifer has it's an incredible and tragic story that ultimately has produced some positive results in terms of the violent crime that was committed against her, misidentifying the perpetrator, who then spent years in jail, Ronald Cotton, and was then exonerated. And Jennifer and Ronald then now go around together often and talk about these issues. And so, Jennifer, I want to thank you for your incredible advocacy. And I want to recognize Joe Diaz, who's here today from San Mateo County, who spent 9 years in prison for a rape that he did not commit. Finished his sentence, and then years later was finally exonerated, and had to spend all those years first in prison, then on the sex offender registry for a crime he didn't commit. So I now want to turn it over to my co-author and partner in this bill, Assemblyman Mark Levine.
Thank you very much, Senator Wiener. I want to commend you to your commend you for your commitment to this issue and leadership on it. It's clearly very important. We want to make sure that people who are innocent remain with their families and their loved ones. We want to make sure that people who are committing crimes are taken off our streets and repay their debt to society. I'm Assemblymember Mark Levine. I represent the North Bay in the State Assembly, and I'm very proud to stand with Senator Wiener and co-author this bill. I think it's our duty to do everything we can to keep innocent people out of prison, and SB 923 is a very good step in that direction. By adding some common sense precautions, we can avoid the kind of botched prosecutions that we've heard about that robbed innocent people of nearly 20,000 years of freedom. According to the National Registration of Exoneration, since 1989, innocent people have lost 19,794 total years in the United States. In California, over that same period, nearly 200 people have been exonerated. Together, they endured 1,633 years of wrongful imprisonment. That's 1,633 missed birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. Imagine the order of magnitude of friends and family members' personal milestones that they missed during that time that was robbed from them. That's 200 Californians serving time for a crime they did not commit, and 200 Californians not spending time they rightfully deserve with their family, their loved ones, and friends. SB 923, as you've heard, will adopt procedural safeguards to ensure that innocent lives are not wrongfully imprisoned and that guilty parties are held accountable. Thank you.
Now I'll invite up Jennifer Thompson.
Thank you so much. I'm extremely grateful to be here. I've been here before on bills such as this. This isn't my first time speaking in California about eyewitness identification reform. I am going to hope it might be my last. But I do want to thank Representative Wiener and Representative Levine for co-sponsoring this bill. I want to thank the ACLU, the California Innocence Project, for asking me to come. And you're going to see a video in a little bit about my story and Ron's story. But I want to kind of start at the beginning. I'm going to briefly tell you the story, but then I really want to talk to you about what is the impact, what is the aftermath, what does the aftercare look like for wrongful convictions. I am Jennifer Thompson. I am from North Carolina. And, I was brought up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is a very racially divided community, as you can imagine, in the South. I was born what I would consider a white privileged individual that was given by my birthright certain understandings of the criminal justice system. One was that if you went to prison, you were guilty, and two, if you were a crime survivor, you got justice. And that's what I was told, and I grew up believing that, and that was good. Until the year of 1984, when I was 22 years old, living in a small North Carolina community, Burlington, North Carolina, attending Elon College, which is now Elon University. And I was 22 years old, living a 22-year-old life. I was dating. We were going to be engaged pretty soon. I was going into my senior year of college. I had a job that I was paying my own bills. I was also maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and I was going to graduate valedictorian of my class in the spring of 1985. So I was really proud of where I was as a 22-year-old young woman. But July 29th of 1984 would change all that for me forever. I had gone to bed early on the night of July 28th, alone. I lived alone, and around 3 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by a strange man who had jumped on my body and put a knife to my throat, and as I screamed, told me to shut up or he would kill me. Many things go through your mind at that moment. If you've ever been a victim of a violent crime, there's several things that go through your mind. And the first thing that goes through your mind is, will I die? And when I die, will it hurt? And how long will it take me to die? And you start thinking about the people you leave behind. I started thinking about my father, who I loved dearly, and what it would be like for him to get that phone call to come and identify my body. And then something happened in my brain where I very quickly decided that if I died, it's not going to be in this bed on my back. That you may kill me, but it won't be here. And I made a plan. The first plan was to live. The second plan was to know who you are. And so over the next 20 minutes as he assaulted me, I would begin to pay attention. And those fleeting moments of light, and when I could look in his face, I would begin to memorize the parts of the human face. I would listen to his voice. I would pay attention to things, such as did he have a scar or a tattoo or a piercing. I would remember everything. I would burn it in my memory because I wanted to make sure I lived, and I wanted to make sure he paid for what he was doing to me. After about 20 minutes, I was able to talk him off of me. I went to the bathroom to think about. I said, I have to go to the bathroom. Can I just have a moment? But it gave me an opportunity to have some light, to look in his face, to stand near him, to figure out how tall he was. What did he weigh? What were his clothes he was wearing? Everything became important. It meant I was going to live. I was able to let him, let me go get a glass of water. Please, I'm thirsty. Could I have some water first? He said, yes, hurry up. And as I went into the kitchen, I turned the lights on to keep him away from me. And then I ran. I ran through the dark. It was raining at this point. I had no clothes on, but a blanket. I had no shoes on. And I ended up arriving in a carport where the light was on, hoping that if he was going to kill me, somebody might see me. But it happened to be a college professor that I didn't know who lived there. And she and her husband let me in and saved me. He escaped the police that night, ended up in another woman's home within an hour, breaking into her den window and raping her and beating her and destroying her life as well within an hour and less than a mile away from where my apartment had been. I was taken to the hospital to have a rape kit done, and I began to give a description of the assailant. It was so clear to the police that I had taken great care and lots of opportunities to memorize his face that they asked if I could help do a composite sketch, which I did, and I wanted to because I needed him to be removed off the streets of Burlington, North Carolina. We had a serial rapist, and women were going to be in danger. I wanted to help participate. So I gave a description. It ended up in the newspapers, and it led to a suspect by the name of Ronald Cotton, a young African-American man, 22 years old. 3 days after my assault, I was called into the police station to view a photographic lineup. I looked, I paid attention, and I picked out number 3. And the officer, Mike Galden, looked at me and said, good job, that's who we thought it was. And I was so relieved. I was so relieved I had gotten it right. The second victim was not able to make a description. She was not able to look at the lineup. She'd been beaten, she had been bitten, she had been smothered with a pillow, she had a flashlight in her face and a knife to her throat, and she simply couldn't do it. And so I had to do this for her and for every woman who would never receive justice. Ronald Cotton would be arrested and held over for trial until January of 1985. 2 weeks of my life, I sat in that courtroom and listening to him lie over and over again, 2.5 days. I had to testify over and over again with graphic detail about what he had done to me over and over, while my father sat there and wept. Where my own character was assassinated because I had the audacity to go to bed only in my underwear. And didn't I know that that's what lured rapists to rape you? The jury deliberated 4 hours at the end of the 2 weeks and found Ronald Cotton guilty of all charges, and he would be sentenced to life and 54 years, and I would finally breathe. And then I would be tasked to put my life back together again, to somehow move forward. But I couldn't put my life back together again because there was nothing recognizable about my life, and there never would be again. I moved out of North Carolina. I met a new man. I got engaged. And then the North Carolina Court of Appeals decided to overturn the decision. They said that the jury should have known there had been a second victim who couldn't make an identification. And if she couldn't make an identification, perhaps my memory had been wrong. Ronald was running around Central Prison claiming that he was innocent, and not only innocent, but the actual perpetrator was in the same prison, in the same block as he was. A man by the name of Bobby Poole running around bragging that he had committed these crimes. So in 1987, under voir dire, they brought Bobby Poole into the courtroom. He, of course, categorically denied having done these assaults. And when we were asked, did we recognize Bobby Poole, both the second survivor and myself said no, we had never seen him before in our lives, and that was it. Ronald Cotton would be found guilty of all charges again and sentenced to 2 life sentences and 30 years. And once again, we would be tasked with putting together the broken pieces of our lives again. I got married in 1988, and I got pregnant in 1989. In the spring of 1990, I gave birth to triplets, 2 little girls and a baby boy, these gifts that I deserved because I had been so harmed. But it gave me a task and it gave me a job, and I now knew what I was going to do with my life. I was going to be a mother to Morgan and Blake and Brittany. And I was happy to do that until the spring of 1995 when Mike Gaulding came back to my house, and as the captain of the Burlington Police Department, he told me that Ronald Cotton was still claiming he was innocent, that the courts of North Carolina might require a DNA test to go forward. But my blood sample had disintegrated after 11 years, and now I would have to submit to a new blood sample, to which I replied, you're going to take that blood today, and you're going to run that test, because I am a mother of 5-year-old triplets, and I am busy, and I can't do this again. So I gave them the blood, and they ran it to the lab, and I didn't think about it until the first week of June of 1995, when Mike Gaulding came back to my house and looked at me and said, that DNA doesn't belong to Ronald Cotton. It's Bobby Poole's. And then the earth swallowed me. I didn't know what to do with this new information. There was no guidebook for me. All I knew was that a man was coming out of prison after 11 years. And somehow my identification had led to that. And there was no person on this earth that could have beaten me up more bloody than I did myself for the next 2 years. I was suffocating in depression and anxiety and panic disorder. I finally asked for a meeting with Mr. Cotton in a small church not far from where I'd been raped 13 years before. And with all the grace and mercy, I asked him if he could forgive me, and he looked at me and he said, Jennifer, I forgave you years ago. I'm not angry at you. We began to heal that day because we both realized that the criminal justice system had failed us both. But it didn't just fail me, and it didn't just fail Ronald. It failed our families. 11 birthdays and Christmases were gone for Ronald. Family vacations never happened. He didn't have the opportunity like I did to go to college and start a family. But it also failed the community when we realized that Bobby Poole had been out free for all those months and committed over 24 other violent crimes, 6 of which were first-degree rapes, 1 of which he came back and raped a victim a second time. I would have the opportunity in 2009 to sit with his last victim He'd been shot in the leg as he was leaving her home after assaulting her. And I sat with her, and it's when I realized what the concentric circles of harm look like when the criminal justice system fails. It's not a single actor that gets harmed. It's not an exoneree that just gets harmed. It's his or her mother and father. It's their children that are left when the parent goes to prison. It's the siblings that have to stay at home on the weekends and get their homework done while mom's going to prison to visit their child. It's the crime survivors who realize decades later that the system failed them, and didn't just fail them, but aren't interested in actually finding the perpetrator. Or if they do find the perpetrator, the statute of limitations is worn off and he walks out after everything that he has done. But it's also the community. It's the collateral victims that get harmed when we've left a perpetrator out on the street. So when we think about wrongful convictions, when we look at the numbers of 2,300 wrongfully convicted men and women in this country, it isn't 2,300 people that have been harmed. We can multiply those numbers by 100, by 1,000, when we talk about jurors that now have to reconcile the fact that they sat on a trial, that they've opened up the newspaper and realized that 30 years ago, they participated in a wrongful conviction. It's the police officers who are trying their best, but then have to acknowledge that they failed the crime survivors, that they were sworn to protect and serve. Mike Galden will tell you to this day it was the worst day of his life, that not only did he have to reconcile that Ronald Cotton had been innocent, but he had to come and deliver the news to me. And Mike Galden went on his own, to pass all these reforms on his own before anybody else was talking about it. Because as he told his department, I will no longer ever participate in a system that could wrongfully convict an innocent man or woman and have to go and deliver the news again to a family. Senate Bill 923 is just common sense. It doesn't just protect innocent men and women, but it protects the crime survivors. It protects you as a community. I've been here before. I've talked about this. I would like to see California be a leader and pass Senate Bill 923. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think now is the video, right? Okay, enjoy the video, or don't enjoy it, but absorb the video. And thank you for being here today. And Jennifer, thank you so much again, Jennifer, for being here. I mean, to have to keep recounting over and over again, you're an incredible human being, and thank you for devoting your life to this.
It's a cliche of courtroom dramas. That moment when the eyewitness is asked, "Do you see the person who committed the crime here in this courtroom before you?" Well, it happens in real courtrooms all the time. And to jurors, that point of the finger by a confident witness is about as damning as evidence can get. But there is one type of evidence that's even more persuasive, and that, of course, is DNA. There have been 233 people exonerated by DNA in this country, and now a stunning pattern has emerged. More than 3/4 of them were sent to prison, at least in part, because an eyewitness pointed a finger, an eyewitness who we now know was wrong. It was hot and humid in Burlington, North Carolina on the night of July 28, 1984. Jennifer Thompson, then a 22-year-old college student, had gone to bed early in her off-campus apartment. As she slept, a man shattered the light bulb near her back door, cut her phone line, and broke in.
I remember kind of waking up and turning my head to the side and saying, "Who's there? Who is it?" And I saw the top of someone's head kind of sliding beside my mattress. And I screamed, and I felt a blade go to my throat.
A knife?
A knife. And he told me to shut up or he was gonna kill me.
Her first thought was to offer him anything she had to go away.
"You can have my credit card, you can have my wallet, you can have anything in the apartment, you can have my car." And he looked at me and said, "I don't want your money." And I knew what was getting ready to happen.
She vowed to stay alert and study him so that if she lived, she could help put him away forever.
What is his voice? Does he have an accent? Does he have a scar? Is there a tattoo?
He's raping you and you're studying his
And
face.
it was just trying to pay attention to a detail that if I survived, and that was my plan, I'd be able to help the police catch him.
After about half an hour, Jennifer tricked the rapist into letting her get up and fix him a drink, and she ran out the back door. He fled and raped a second woman half a mile away. Detective Mike Galden met Jennifer at the hospital.
The first comment I remember her making was that, I'm gonna get this guy that did this to me. She said, I took the time to look at him. I will be able to identify him if I'm given an opportunity.
Detective Galden worked with Jennifer to make a composite sketch, poring over eyes, noses, ears, lips, trying to recreate the face she had seen that night. The sketch went out and tips started coming in. One of those tips was about a young man named Ronald Cotton, who worked at a restaurant near the scene of both rapes and had a record, a guilty plea to breaking and entering, and as a teenager to sexual assault. 3 days after the rape, Mike Galden called Jennifer in to do a photo lineup. He laid these 6 pictures down on the table, said the perpetrator may or may not be one of them, and told her to take her time.
Does she say immediately, that's him?
No, she studied each photograph.
I can remember almost feeling like I was at an SAT test. You know, where you start narrowing down your choices. You can discount A and B and...
Oh, like multiple choice.
Exactly.
According to the police report, Jennifer studied the pictures for 5 minutes.
She picked up Ron's photograph and said, that's the man that raped me.
And you must have said, are you sure? And she said yes?
Yeah, oh yes, certainly.
Ronald Cotton heard the news from his mother's boyfriend.
He told me, he said, Ron, he said, the police are looking for you. And I said, for what? He told me, for rape. I said, man, I haven't committed such a crime like that.
Did you panic?
I didn't panic. I'm trying to figure out, why.
He comes in and gives me a very detailed account of where he was, who he was with that night. As it turns out, that was a false alibi.
I realized later that I had got my weekends confused, and so therefore, I gave them the reason to think that I was lying.
This was August 1st, 1984.
Right.
You go in to clear yourself. When did you actually leave?
I didn't.
He was locked up and days later put in a physical lineup.
I'm number 5.
You scared?
I was very scared, nervous. I was so nervous. I was trembling. I felt my body just shaking.
They were asked to step forward, speak, and step back.
I can remember looking to the detective and saying, it's between 4 and 5, can I have him do it again?
And then she knew it was number 5, Ronald Cotton.
Did you feel absolutely certain?
Absolutely certain.
Did anybody say to you, good job?
Well, what was said to me afterwards was, that's the same person you picked out in the photo lineup. So in my mind, I thought, bingo, I did it right. I did it right.
In a week-long trial, the jury heard about Ronald Cotton's faulty alibi, his clothing that matched Jennifer's description, and a piece of foam found on her floor that seemed to come from one of his shoes. And most powerfully, they heard from Jennifer.
When they ask you, do you recognize the man who did this to you? Did you point to him? It was
Absolutely.
Ron Cotton.
It was Ronald Cotton.
She called my name, pointing a finger, and that's all it takes, it seemed like.
What did that feel like?
It felt like someone pushing a knife through me.
It took the jury just 40 minutes. The verdict, guilty on all counts.
He was sentenced to life and 50 years. And it was for me that moment that the justice system works. Because I am the victim, and he's a horrible person, and he will never, ever be free again.
Ronald Cotton was handcuffed, shackled, and taken to North Carolina's Central Prison. He was 22 years old.
They say grown men doesn't cry, but it's a lie. I grabbed my pillow many times and hugged it, wishing I was hugging my mom, my dad, sister, brother. I wish it didn't have to be this way.
He started working in the prison kitchen, singing in the choir, and writing letter after letter to his attorneys, hoping to get a new trial. Then one day, as he watched a new inmate being brought in, he had a strange feeling.
I said, excuse me. I said, I said, you look familiar. I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Burlington. I said, I am too. I said, you kind of resemble the drawing of a suspect in a crime of which I'm falsely in prison for. Did you commit this crime? And he told me, no, he did not.
Wait a sec, you saw him and thought of that composite drawing?
Mm-hmm.
His name was Bobby Poole, and he was in for rape. He started working in the prison kitchen, too.
And the stewardess were calling me Poole instead of Cotton.
They were calling you by his name?
Yes.
In other words, people were mistaking the two of you.
Yes, exactly.
Then a fellow inmate told him that he'd heard Bobby Poole admit to raping Jennifer and the other woman that night. Ronald Cotton won a new trial, and his lawyers called Bobby Poole to the stand with Jennifer sitting right there. It was the moment Ronald Cotton had been hoping for.
Bobby Poole is in the courtroom. You look over there. What happens inside you?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. As a matter of fact, the strongest emotion I felt was anger at the defense, because I thought, how dare you? How dare you question me? How dare you try to paint me as someone who could possibly have forgotten what my rapist looked like? I mean, the one person you would never forget? How dare you?
Ronald Cotton was convicted again, this time given 2 life sentences. Back in prison 7 years later, he and everyone else was riveted by a big news story, the trial of O.J. Simpson.
I would get my radio, put my earplugs, and go outside, sit in a corner.
And listen to the trial.
Yes.
He was intrigued by something he had never heard of, DNA. He wrote to his new attorney, law professor Rich Rosen. Rosen warned him that there probably wasn't any evidence left to test, and if there was, DNA could cut both ways.
Understand, if the DNA comes back and shows that you did this crime, whatever legal issues we have don't make any bit of difference. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison.
He warned you that if it comes up positive, you're sunk.
I told him to put his foot down and go with it.
Packed away on the shelves of the Burlington Police Department was 10-year-old evidence from the 2 rapes that night. Inside one of the rape kits was a fragment of a single sperm with viable DNA. It proved what Ronald Cotton had been saying all along. He was innocent, and the rapist was Bobby Poole. Within days, Ronald Cotton was back in court.
You're walking out here today as a free man.
This time to be released.
So not only do you find out that Ron didn't do the crime, you find out Bobby Poole did.
It was just utter shock, really, disbelief. I mean, by this time, this is 11 years later. And, you know, I know that I've been involved in a case of a man who's lost 11 years of his life. And I was so sad for him and his family.
In the years since Ronald Cotton's conviction, Jennifer had married and had children.
Are you the one that tells her?
Yes. Her reaction, no, that can't be true. It's not possible, you know. I know Ronald Cotton raped me. There's no question in my mind.
It was like someone had just taken my life and like turned it upside down.
She cried?
Oh, she cried. She broke down. I mean, she took it all on herself. You know, the guilt. You know, I did this to that man.
Shame?
Shame, terrible shame. Suffocating, debilitating shame.
But when she thought or dreamed about that night, it was still Ronald Cotton's face she saw. To get past it, she asked if he would meet with her at a local church.
I remember him walking into the church, and I physically could not stand up.
She was nervous, scared.
I started to cry immediately, and I looked at him and I said, Ron, if I spent every second of every minute, every hour for the rest of my life telling you how sorry I am, it wouldn't come close to how my heart feels. I'm so sorry. And Ronald just leaned down, he took my hands.
Oh, gosh.
And he looked at me, he said, I forgive you.
I told her, I said, Jennifer, I forgive you. I don't want you to look over your shoulder. That I just want us to be happy and move on in life.
The minute he forgave me, it's like my heart physically started to heal. And I thought, this is what grace and mercy is all about. This is what they teach you in church that none of us ever get. And here was this man that I had hated with, I mean, I used to pray every day of my life during those 11 years that he would die, that he would be raped in prison and someone would kill him in prison. That was my prayer to God. And here was this man who, with grace and mercy, just forgave me.
That is overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
How wrong I was and how good he is.
How is it that Jennifer could have studied her rapist so carefully and still made this mistake? And how could she have failed to recognize Bobby Poole, the actual rapist, when he sat right in front of her in the courtroom 3 years later? That part of the story when we come back. Has exonerated more than 230 men, mostly in sex crimes and murder cases. Criminologists have been able to go back and study what went wrong in those investigations. What they've honed in on is faulty eyewitness testimony. Over 75% of these innocent men were convicted in part because an eyewitness fingered the wrong person. At the heart of the problem is the fragility of memory. As one researcher told us, we now know that memory is not like a videotape recorder. You don't just record an event and play it back. Instead, memory is malleable, full of holes, easily contaminated and susceptible to suggestion, as in the case of Jennifer Thompson and Ronald Cotton. Before this case, did you think that there were a lot of innocent people put away?
No.
You didn't?
No, I didn't. Innocent people aren't convicted of crimes they didn't commit. I believe that.
What do you think now?
Oh, I know better. I mean, well over 200 cases nationally. We've had a half dozen in this state alone. The first, of course, was my case.
Hallelujah!
And as these innocent men have been freed in one state after the next, we've learned something else, that in all the cases where eyewitnesses were wrong, the real perpetrator was not in the initial lineup.
When you're sitting in front of a photo lineup, you just assume one of these guys is the suspect. It's my job to find it.
And Jennifer did her job. She found the suspect's photo. Problem is, the suspect, Ronald Cotton, was not the rapist.
Bobby Poole's photograph was not in the photo lineup.
Right.
He was not in the physical lineup.
When the real perpetrator is not in the set, is none of them, witnesses have a very difficult time being able to recognize that.
Gary Wells, a professor of psychology at Iowa State University, has been studying eyewitness memory for 30 years. He says when the real guy isn't there, witnesses tend to pick the person who looks most like him.
I think that Ronald Cotton and Bobby Poole look very much alike. They have very similar lips, shape of their eyes, their eyebrows kind of go up in a look of surprise.
Yes. Without him in the lineup, Ronald Cotton was the one who was in jeopardy.
Wells says eyewitness testimony has two key properties. One, it's often unreliable, and two, it is highly persuasive to jurors.
I can see why it's so persuasive. Someone says, I was there. You'd believe that person.
You believe that person because they have no reason to lie.
Yeah.
The legal system is set up to kind of sort between liars and truth tellers, and it's actually pretty good at that. But when someone is genuinely mistaken, the legal system doesn't really know how to deal with that, and we're talking about a genuine error here.
He walked us through what went wrong, some of it counterintuitive. When Jennifer spent 5 minutes studying the photographs, she and Detective Galden thought she was being careful.
I didn't want to come across, I don't think, as somebody who was like, that's the one. I really wanted to be sure.
Wells says no good.
Recognition memory is actually quite rapid. So we find in our studies, for example, that if somebody's taking longer than 10, 15 seconds, it's quite likely that they're doing something other than just using a reliable recognition memory.
So you're saying if she really recognized the guy, it would have been almost instantaneous.
Quite quick, yes.
He says a better way would have been to show Jennifer lineup photos or people one at a time, so that she would compare each one directly to her memory
rather than to one another.
this one is
Wells
sort of
showed me a study in which more than 300 subjects were shown deliberately shaky videotape of a simulated crime.
You look out a window and you see some suspicious behavior. What happens is we tell them later then, this person that you saw right there put a bomb down the air shaft there.
Then subjects are shown a lineup and asked to identify the bomber.
That would be so hard. And
Very
I
difficult.
just saw it.
And of course, you're particularly cautious right now. You know now, after we've talked, probably not to pick anyone.
No, actually, I actually know who it is because
Yeah?
if I had
Who is
come
it?
upon that, I think it's this guy. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. And I'm already saying how hard it is.
It's none of them.
It's not.
And it's so, it's so, and you
Isn't
know
that
about
bizarre?
it. You know about this. We've talked about this. So this is the this is what makes it so
Look what
difficult.
you just did to me.
Yeah.
I'm mortified. I feel like Jennifer.
Wells says in real life, the mistake is often compounded by what happens next. Remember the seemingly innocent information Jennifer says she got from police after she picked Ronald Cotton out of the physical lineup?
That's the same person you picked out in the photo lineup. So in my mind, I thought, bingo, I did it right.
Wells studied what that reinforcement does. After half his subjects did what I did, picked an innocent person from this lineup, he told them nothing, then asked them questions about what they had seen. Very few felt highly confident about their choice.
Only about 4% are saying they had a great view, which is good because we gave them a lousy view. Only about 3% are saying they make out details of the face. That also is good because they really couldn't.
But he told a second group of subjects, after they made the same incorrect choices, good, you picked the suspect.
Now what happens is almost 45% of witnesses now report that they were positive or nearly positive. Notice that over 1/4 of them now say they had a great view. And
This is really what happened to Jennifer.
it is what happened with
Yeah.
Jennifer.
What this seems to be saying is that a reinforcement alters memory
It does.
dramatically.
It does.
He says the solution is to have someone independent administer the lineup, someone who doesn't even know who the suspect is, and certainly not the detective on the case.
You shouldn't have been there.
I shouldn't have been there.
No. But nobody did anything wrong. I mean, that was the
Well, no, that
practice.
was the common practice
Yeah.
then. It was the tradition. It was how it was done then. Law enforcement wasn't schooled in memory. We weren't schooled in protecting memory, treating it like a crime scene, where you're very careful, methodical about what you do and how you use it. I mean, we weren't taught that in those days.
But none of these errors explains perhaps the most puzzling part of this story, how it is that Jennifer could see Bobby Poole in the courtroom and not realize her mistake.
You're looking into the face of the man who raped you, whose face you had studied so intently.
Yes.
And there's no flicker, nothing between you and Bobby Poole.
Nothing. I've gone back there many times trying to think, was there ever a moment? Did I ever look at him and think, and I didn't.
Elizabeth Loftus is a professor of psychology and law at the University of California, Irvine, and an expert in memory. She showed me an experiment she says might help explain Jennifer's mistake. She asked me to study these faces. Then, after a few minutes, she gave me a memory test.
Which of these two faces do you recognize?
Right.
Okay, you picked right.
Left.
You picked left.
And I
Okay.
said left, but I wasn't 100% sure.
And then, the tricky part.
Oh. Well, I'll tell you why I'm stymied. Because I just picked this one on the left 2 seconds ago. But now I'm not sure, because those two look very much alike to me. But I'm going to tell you the left.
But I was wrong. It was the one on the right. Loftus explained how I had been duped.
You saw this face, then I gave you a test where I presented you with an altered face along with a novel one. So I pretty much induce you to pick a wrong face because I don't even have the real guy there. It's an altered version. And later on, when you now have a choice between the altered one and the real one, you stuck with your altered left choice.
This is exactly what happened to Jennifer.
This can help us understand why Jennifer can be sitting in a courtroom and be looking at Bobby Poole, the original rapist, and looking at Ronald Cotton and saying, no, it's not Poole, it's Cotton, because she has been picking him all along.
I begin to wonder whether there should ever be eyewitness testimony in trials.
Well,
because of the tricks that memory plays.
yeah. I think what's important, though, is to understand that, know it as a police officer, as an investigator, as attorneys.
We need eyewitnesses. I mean, if we couldn't convict based on an eyewitness, that's giving a lot of comfort to criminals. We have no choice. We have to find ways to make this evidence better.
And that's something Jennifer has tried to do ever since, by telling her story to prosecutors, police, defense attorneys. And she's had some success. Her state, North Carolina, was the first in the country to mandate reforms by law, showing victims lineup photos one at a time and emphasizing that the right answer may be none of the above. Having lineups conducted by a person who doesn't know who the suspect is, or not by a person at all.
The person who committed the crime may or may not be included.
One system now used in a handful of cities is computer software Mike Galden helped develop to have a laptop conduct photo lineups.
Does this person look familiar to you?
But law professor Rich Rosen says that in the vast majority of places there's been no reform, and that needs to change.
This is something that police officers can and should be in favor of.
Because you're not getting the real guy off the street.
Yeah, Bobby Poole raped other women because they went after Ron Cotton. So Ron is not the only person who suffered from this mistake.
Ronald Cotton, now 47 years old, has worked hard to rebuild his life. He works the late shift in a factory. He's been married for 12 years and has a 10-year-old daughter. They live in a house paid for with money North Carolina paid him in restitution, $10,000 for each of the 11 years he spent in prison. When he can, he joins Jennifer in her campaign for reforms. One of the most amazing things to have come out of this miscarriage of justice is the most unlikely of friendships. Jennifer and Ron say they speak on the phone about once a week. They're families of friends. They say they have a shared bond that is hard for most people to fathom.
Have people ever met you for the first time when you're together and said kind of cheerily, hey, how did you two meet?
Yeah.
They
We
have?
did it on the airplane a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We're traveling. And I usually just go, you tell them.
What do you say?
We would look at each other and laugh, and finally we go ahead
and tell them.
And they have recently co-authored a book in hopes that their story can inform and inspire others.
Today, when you think about what happened to you that night when you were 22 years old, whose face is there?
Nobody's.
Oh my.
That to me is one of the most beautiful things, is I don't have a face. Bobby Poole's dead. I don't ever have to worry about him ever hurting another woman. He died in prison. And Ronald Cotton is my friend.
For more on how memories can be contaminated, go to 60minutes.com.